Good morning. You ready? Are you recording for Nora? Yeah? Okay. Blanca's recording for Nora, so 1, 2, 3, everybody say hi Nora. 1, 2, 3. Hi Nora. There we go. Thank you. If you'd like to flip over to Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9, we're going to start in verse 7, actually. Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 7. In case you don't know, in a couple of months, the new Star Wars movie's coming out. Okay, 2 of us will be there. All right. And to start out this lesson this morning, I wanted to go back to episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. All right. Now, if you're not a Star Wars fan, we'll pray for you. But in episode 5, Luke goes to the swampy world of Dagobah to be trained by Master Yoda. And in his training, Luke learns how to be a Jedi, which one of the Jedi abilities is telepathy, the ability to move stuff with your mind, they would say through the Force. And Luke is practicing with rocks, stacking rocks through the power of the Force. Now, while he's doing this, he looks out and his ship, which when he crashed into this swampy planet, he crashed into water. Well, the ship sinks out of existence. And since, again, this is a land or a reality where you get to where you're going through starships, his is now gone. He now looks at the situation thinking he's going to spend the rest of his natural life stuck here on a swampy island with nobody but Yoda to talk to, and Yoda speaks backwards, And so it doesn't look too well. Yoda, however, looks at him with this expression of, well, raise your ship out of the water. Duh. And Luke says, were you crazy? Yoda, you've been doing that with the rocks. You've been stacking rocks. With the power of mind. Now do the same thing to the ship. And Luke has that famous line, Yoda, this is totally different. To which Yoda says, no different. Only different in your mind. Well, Luke tries, and he fails. Walks by Yoda, who only stands yay tall to begin with, and says, you want the impossible. Goes over, sits down, and sulks. Little 2-foot-tall Yoda goes over to where the swamp is, and with the power of the Force, raises the ship, the entire starship, out of the swamp and puts it on firmer ground. Luke sees this, goes over to Yoda, and he says, I don't believe it. To which Yoda replies, that is why you fail. Luke chapter 9 is a great chapter. They're all great. But there's a theme in Luke 9. Luke 8, you might remember we talked about this a bit. Luke 8, the big theme of Luke 8 was the power, the grand nature of the power of Christ. Luke 9, though, carries with it the theme of who is Jesus? Who is He really? And we started off Luke 9 last week by Jesus sending out the 12. He's done these great works. He's calmed the seas with a word. He's cast thousands of demons out of a person. And in the span of an afternoon, a woman was healed who was able to brush his cloak with her fingertips, and he raised a girl from the dead. Grand power coming from Jesus. And then after that, in Luke 9, Jesus sends out the 12. He gives them authority to cast out demons and to heal disease. And He says, okay, now you all go out and don't take anything with you. Don't take any extra clothes. Don't take any money. Don't take a money bag. Don't take a walking stick. Don't take extra shoes. Don't do any of that. But go out. And now you do what you have seen Jesus do. It's your turn. You go do this now. And so they go. Now we're going to see what happens when they come back. But again, the question is, who is Jesus? Who is this guy? How is he able to do all that? And this question started to be raised by those in high power. In verse 7 it says, Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was going on, and he was perplexed. He was confused. Let's face it. If we heard about what Jesus was doing back in that period of time, we might be a little confused too. He was perplexed because some were saying that John had been raised from the dead. John's dead. He got decapitated because of Herod. Others that Elijah had appeared, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago had come back to life. But Herod said, I beheaded John. Who then is this I hear such things about? And he tried to see him. There's a question. Who is Jesus? And this question is going to follow us now through the rest of this chapter and elements of it through the rest of the Gospel of Luke. Who is he? Who is Jesus that He's able to do what He does? Who is Jesus that He's able to speak as He speaks? Who is this man? Well, if anybody would have a basic idea of who Jesus was, it would be the 12, right? After all, they've been following Him from Luke 5 moving forward. And then at the beginning of Luke 9, after seeing everything that Jesus has done, and after hearing the way that Jesus speaks and the message that He has, He then gives them power for them to go out and do some of the same stuff that Jesus is able to do. Talk about groovy. You now have the authority. Authority. Not just the power to heal people. You have authority over diseases. You tell a disease to get out of there, it's going to get out of there. You tell a demon, get out of that person, the demon is going to go and not have a choice because you now have authority over it. This is what Jesus gave the 12. Authority. Now go use it. Don't know how long the missionary journeys were. Don't know everything that they did because Luke picks up the account of Jesus with them coming back. After all, the gospel accounts, the purpose of the gospel is to tell Jesus' story, not necessarily the 12. And so in verse 10, we pick this up. It says, When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then He took them with Him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. But the crowds learned about it and followed Him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God, and He healed those who needed healing. I was blessed to be a part in a situation with churches that I grew up in, that we did the camps and the mission trips and that kind of stuff, the devotionals and the weekend retreats. And at the end of it, there was always this cap-off night. When you spent a week in a different state or in a different town, and you've dedicated yourself to service to others that you have no idea who they were before you got there. There was a cap-off night. There was a night that we came together as a youth group. And it was typically the next Sunday night whenever we got back. And we just talked. We spoke about our experiences. We spoke about what we saw and what we experienced, and these new things we were able to do, and these new lands that we have never seen before. Think back to a period of time. West Texas is great to drive through now because the posted speed limit after Monahans, Texas, is 80 miles an hour. That's legally how fast you can go. But you think back in the day, back in the 80s and the 90s, it was still 55 or 60. Some of the places we went to were a long way away with a whole lot of nothing to see. But what was the experience like? What was the journey like? What was the personal journey? What did we learn from it? What did we experience from it? What was it like to see places and to see people that were not as good, not as comfortable as what we were used to at home? What was it like? Experience is important. And it's good to talk about these experiences and how they affect us, and they become a part of us, and they help mold us into what we will one day become. This is what Jesus is doing with the 12. They come back, and they meet up in Bethsaida. And Jesus wants to take the 12 and go off by themselves to an isolated place so that they can just speak about the experiences. So they can talk about the people that they were able to heal. And they could talk about the demons that they casted out. And they talk about the words of the kingdom of heaven that they were able to say. To just talk about the experience and to grow from the experience. So Jesus can help them put into context everything that they experienced of how it furthers the kingdom. It was a time of bonding and growing. Fellowship and family. It was beautiful. But as what happens, the crowds found him. Happens a lot. And think back, this is back before the days of internet. Jesus could not stay hidden for long. He would be found sooner or later, and they found him. And they came, and boy, did they come. The gospel accounts tell us that there was 5,000 men. 5,000 men. And this was not a male retreat, which means that there were women and children with them in tow. Which means there could have been 10, 15, maybe even 20,000 people there. It wasn't just a few people that found them one day. Droves of people. And if they're in a sandy area, you just see the sand rise before the people even make themselves known. And it just seems like the entire city is coming down upon them. They've been found. The 12 might be thinking, but this is supposed to be our time. This is supposed to be our time of rest. What are you doing here? Jesus doesn't act that way. No. The crowds find him, and Jesus takes the time. It says he welcomed them. He welcomed them. He didn't shoo them away. I've had the opportunity to hear missionaries talk, and I heard one missionary say that on a trip to Africa, they tried to make one day a week a day of rest, a day of just the missionaries to talk and hang out with each other. And again, this is the stuff that we're talking about here. To bond and to speak about their experiences and to feed themselves. See, this is one of the temptations of ministry. We are put into positions of sharing the Lord with others. And sometimes we share the Lord with others without sharing the Lord with ourselves. And we have to remember that when we evangelize to other people, we try to share the Word with other people, we got to remember that we keep sharing the Word with ourselves. And so they would dedicate a day, a week, for personal inspection, personal talk, for the feeding of their own souls, so to speak. And that's good. But the crowds came. And where it had been so tempting, because I'm sure the 12 were tired. Jesus might have been tired. People in ministry positions, they get tired. It happens. But he doesn't say, no, come and we'll talk tomorrow. No. He welcomes them in. Come on. Come sit around us. He welcomes them. And he speaks to them about the kingdom of God, and he healed those who needed healing. And so, once again, he's doing the same thing that he has been doing since the beginning of his ministry in the Gospel of Luke, but also has been doing the same thing and continuing the theme that the disciples have just been doing in their own personal walks, in their own personal ministries, when Jesus sent them out. Now they're able to do it again. Teaching about the kingdom of heaven, healing those who need healing. But, as we all know, time stands still for no man. time moves on. It says, late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging because we are in a remote place here. There's 15 to 20,000 people around and nobody, except we'll find out later, except a little boy decided to pack lunch. This is some bad planning. But there's all these people around. There's no Sam's, there's no Walmart, there's no Costco. There's not even the Lubies. There's nothing around to eat. Now the disciples come to Jesus and they come to Him with an attitude of concern. People didn't bring their cars either. They walked out here. We need energy to walk. It's getting late. Nobody's eating anything. Send the crowds away so that they can go to some remote village and find food, so that they can refresh themselves, so they will have energy, so they will be able to walk and not faint on the way home. Do it for their good. It's not bad what they're suggesting. It's a level of care. They don't want anybody to faint on the way home. To which Jesus says one of those great statements in the New Testament that I personally love so much. And in the scene of Jesus and the 12 in the middle of a crowd of thousands of people with no grocery store to go to, Jesus looks at the 12 and He says, in verse 13, He replied, you give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. You do it. Really? There was one time in Deming, New Mexico, I got roped into feeding models. Yeah, you heard me right. I was hired to cook a dinner for 30 or so models. Have you ever tried to feed models? Yeah. I grilled a lot of chicken and I made a lot of steamed vegetables. Is basically what we did. And but it was like having the idea of trying to get it together because the person I was working for, she wasn't really good about the details, and so she wasn't really good about calling me back to what she wanted the menu to be until almost the 11th hour. Then it was like mad dash to get everything seasoned, to get the grill up and going, grill it, and then take it back into town in order to feed the models. Which they did eat, by the way. Don't let them fool you. They can pack it away. All right? But that was just for 30 people. Last minute, what are we going to do in order to get it all together? And I had Walmart to go to, and I had all this to go to. Again, Jesus and the 12, thousands of people, nothing to go to. Jesus looks at the 12, you feed them. You give them something to eat. Could you imagine if you've hosted people in your home in which you expected to feed them food, and you find out you have nothing? Have you ever had that feeling in the pit of your stomach? What do we do? I got nothing. And what do we automatically think? They are going to think so bad about me that I do not know how to host. What do you do? That's not the question. The question isn't the 12 asking themselves, what do we do? The question should be, what have you just done? What have they just been out doing? They have just spent an unidentified moment of time going out, preaching the kingdom of heaven, healing diseases, and casting out demons. Healing diseases, casting out demons. How many people can do this? How is this type of activity even possible? And yet now you found yourself surrounded by a mob of people, and Jesus gives you the charge, you give them something to eat. And now you're going to look at Jesus and thinking, you have no idea what you're talking about. What can we possibly do? Where did the power go? Where did the abilities and the authority that Jesus gave you in the previous section go in the span of a few verses? It didn't go anywhere. They still had it. Jesus gives them this question, gives them this charge. You give them something to eat with the ability and with the hope that they would be able to put two and two together and realize, just like we healed the sick and we cast out demons, we're going to be able to do something here to feed the people. But they will not be able to do it if they do not believe and realize they have the power. If they have the attitude of, well, I just don't believe it. That is why they fail. Jesus gives them the charge. You give them something to eat. Their answer is this. They answered, we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd. About 5,000 men were there. After being able to do all the stuff that they had been able to do, their response is, well, maybe we can scrap some pennies together and go to town and buy some pizza. Maybe that's what we can do. Maybe that's what we can do. That's their only response. That's it. That's all we got. Let's go buy food. You can almost see Jesus' facepalm. Said, no. Verse 14. But he said to the disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. The disciples did so, and everybody sat down, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to set before the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Now, we don't get a big crowd reaction from this miracle. The miracle wasn't for the crowd. The miracle was for the 12. The miracle is for us today. There was no reason why the 12 could not have come up with a similar solution to the task Jesus set them to feed the crowd. Now, we read this kind of quickly in Luke because, again, the previous section, Jesus sends them out and gives them authority. But again, we had this block of time that we're not privy to, in which they were actually able to go out and to use this power. They have used it. Don't think that they're novices in this, per se, but they have used this. They have experienced the power. They have experienced the authority. They have done it. But when something big came along, the faith in the authority wavered. When something bigger came along, a bigger obstacle, a bigger task, a bigger job, they looked at what they have done and they thought to themselves, what am I going to do now? I got nothing. Why? When the power of Jesus and the authority that He has is so much more. That's why we read John 1, and that's why we read Colossians 1. What was it talking about there? It was talking about who Jesus is. Jesus is the light in John 1. Jesus is the head in Colossians. He is the one. He is the power. He is the authority. And when we forget who Jesus is, our faith wavers to where we start to doubt. And we can start to doubt Jesus' ability, Jesus' authority, Jesus' identity. And then we start doubting what we're able to do. Because we have been given some big tasks of our own. Are we going to go out and start casting out demons and start healing people? No. But we can go out and start evangelizing and start telling others about Christ. And leading others to Christ. But if we don't think that Jesus has given us the power to do so, and we forget that He has sent us the Holy Spirit to guide us in our tasks, and we think that we're alone, we won't do it, and we might actually start feeling abandoned. We might start thinking, "Oh, I need to have a special case. I need to be in the mood. I need to have that special circumstance." And then I can do something. John W. Smith, another preacher, he's taken people on missionary journeys. And he tells the story of how he'll take Christians on their first missionary journey to Africa or Central America or these other types of places, and they would just blossom into these great evangelists. And they don't know a stranger when they go abroad and try to share the gospel with other people. They'll talk to anybody. Through a translator, without a translator, it doesn't matter. They'll just talk to them and talk to them about Christ and try to lead them to Christ. But then they come back to America and they clam up and they stop. They don't do anything. They go back to work. They start doing their 9 to 5 again. They go home to their families, and they have their family's life. And they go to church, and they sit in the back pew, and they do nothing. He said there were some times that he will call them on that. He said, "What are you doing? How come you stopped?" He said, "Well, I did my evangelism work in Africa." There's nothing magical about Africa. There's nothing magical about Central America. There's nothing magical about going away and evangelizing. God doesn't want us to go to Ecuador. He wants us to go next door in order to share the gospel message of Christ. He's not worried about distant places. What do we believe He has the power to do here and now? The 12 thought they had authority while they were away from Jesus and able to do all the stuff they were while they were on their own. But Jesus presents them a problem when they're all together and Jesus is there with them, and they look at Him like, I don't have no idea what to do. What kind of a relationship with God is that? What kind of evangelism is that? What kind of faith in the power of Christ is that? When we think that the power of Christ is limited by number. This miracle is for the 12. And what did the 12 see? Jesus take a little bit. 5 loaves and 2 fish. And multiply it. It doesn't say how. It said He multiplied it. He gave thanks and He broke them. And He kept breaking. And He gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And then isn't this interesting? They didn't have just enough to feed 15 to 20,000 people. They had leftovers. If they had them back in the day, they could have taken styrofoam boxes home with fish and bread. And then, like people today, probably would have left them on the ground as they went home and after the meal. There was leftovers. There was more than what was required. As Dale talked about earlier, there was a flood of biblical proportion of what God was able to provide. God does not care about number. God does not care about odds. Another great Star Wars line. Don't never tell me the odds. God don't care about those. God doesn't care about what the situation is. His power is there. His ability is there. His authority is there. But do we trust it? Yeah, we have been given great responsibilities in this world. We have been charged with leading others to Christ. We have been charged with living righteous lives, living faithfully. And through the example of our lives, again, also leading others to Christ. What do we show the world? Are we prone to panic at the first inkling of obstacles coming into our way? And we let that panic frustrate us, beguile us, blind us to what the truth is, and that is that God is still there. But we react, and the world sees us react with an idea of we have no idea what to do. What does that show the world? What does that show the lost? Why should they have faith in a God that we are showing them we don't really have faith in ourselves? Jesus and the 12 surrounded by a mob of 15 to 20,000 people who were hungry. A hungry crowd can turn vicious. There was no need to panic. Because the situation, the answer was there. Take a little and then add the power of God, and it become enormous. There was no reason to panic, just like there was no reason to panic in the boat. And there was no reason to panic with the legion. And there was no reason to panic with the woman who bled for 12 years. And there was no reason to panic with the dead girl. There was no reason to panic. There was no reason to panic. The 12 came back. What did that mean? They didn't starve to death on their journeys in which they were not allowed to take food with them. They didn't starve. They didn't dehydrate. They didn't freeze to death or get sunstroke from a lack of or too many clothes. God took care of them on their journey, which was the point. They learned to trust God. But they forgot it with the crowd. We are taught and taught over again, we can trust God. God is worthy of our trust. He is worthy of our faith. And if we forget it, that's our misfortune. Because God's power and authority is still there. Waiting for us to realize it. Who is Jesus? Who is He? He is the one with the authority. And as long as we remain faithful and trustworthy in Him, He is also the one who is on our side. And we have no reason to fear. And we have no reason to doubt. But we have every reason to live. And to live fully in the knowledge of, in the end, one way or the other, it is going to work out. Never doubt it. Never question it. Live with the freedom that Christ is with us. This morning we'd like to offer the invitation to those of you who may be hurting or suffering. We would love to pray with you and study with you and be your friend and adopt you into our families. To show you what the love of Christ is really like. Or you might wish to tell us something wonderful that's happened to you this past week. We'd love to rejoice with you as your spiritual family. Or you might wish to put your Savior on in baptism, to have your past sins washed away, to be endowed with the power of the Holy Spirit, and to be welcomed into the family that God has created for all of us with the hope of being with God forever in heaven. We would love to assist you with that this morning. But whatever you have, whatever need you have, would you please come down as we stand and as we sing.